Thanks, Susan. Um, so things are changing. I think we all recognize that. Labor and supply chain shortages have changed plans. They've changed trajectories across all industries and around the globe. In August of 2021, the Bureau of Labor Statistics reported that more people quit their jobs than at any time in any previous time in history. So this shortage of workers goes beyond traditional labor difficulties, and it's having an unanticipated effect on business and on industry. What happens in your own company when the workers you relied upon quit and you don't have a pool of replacement candidates? How does this affect your pool of experts and that deep bench of knowledge that ran your organization and it ran your plant? If your business survival depends on essential tranches of knowledge, what is essential? What training can be foregone at this particular point in time? We're going to look at the state of business and industry in the spring of 2022 to examine if your knowledge management plan is serving you during this crisis in human resource and technological upheaval. And by the way, I am a fan of interaction, so please do put your comments and questions in the chat box while we're going along. We'll keep an eye on that. So here's a little inside baseball about these webinars. When we propose our webinar topics, we do it about 6 months in advance. So last fall, I proposed to talk about what we were then calling the Great Resignation and the effect of the shortage of workers on goods and on knowledge management. But I didn't know if this topic would still be relevant today or if these issues would resolve themselves as COVID receded into the rearview mirror. Well, in this case, the shortage of goods and workers is now more urgent, and it's made worse by, unfortunately, a war that's starting to look like it's going to continue, and it's probably going to continue to disrupt business domestically and globally. So this development is actually kicking this issue of knowledge management into a whole new realm. And in the sense that I believe some structures are not going to continue, but new ones will be built up to replace the old ones. So we're going to talk about the challenges of needing people, some skilled and some not skilled, and the effect that it has on an organization's approach to knowledge management as these radical shifts are occurring. So the Great Resignation has put a different spin on capturing and preserving essential knowledge. When I wrote books on working with subject matter experts from 2014 to 2018, this issue was really about the loss of experienced workers with the retiring of the baby boom generation. This current knowledge loss in 2022 is a completely different animal. Back in 2014, I don't think any of us could have seen the pandemic coming. People being told to stay home, people not wanting to work out of fear, people choosing not to work because the government's handing out free money, all the strange employment gaps that we're seeing now. So the knowledge management issue is still about losing essential knowledge that makes your business run, but it has expanded to losing bodies willing to even do the menial work that takes almost no training, or the loss of people that do jobs that take just a general skill set. Business today is threatened by a knowledge loss and people loss across the spectrum, from expert to entry-level worker. Well, the Working with SMEs methodology focuses on specialists who have knowledge that can't be replicated outside your organization. When you lose people who have skills, experience, and relationships that keep the business afloat, you lose customers and you lose orders. Today, this is happening even in industries that usually would not have such a threat, like fast food restaurants. The bottom line is that the loss of expert knowledge that threatened businesses has now expanded to the loss of human beings to do the work to keep the businesses afloat. And this knowledge management challenge is a different kind of animal. This chart is from a company called Statista, and it's a great place to look for data, by the way. Anyway, in the first half of January 2022, 3 months ago, an estimated 8.8 million workers in the US had to stay home due to either being infected with COVID-19 or caring for someone who became infected. And this is not only an increase of over 2 million people year over year, but it also suggests that the biggest workforce shortage is happening right now since the start of the pandemic. This is what the chart indicates. It's getting worse. While the first corona winter hit the United States workforce hard, around 6.6 million employees were forced to skip work due to the virus in January of 2021. This can largely be attributed to the virus having free reign. It was out there, people were getting it. But now the mass vaccination campaign started on December 14th, 2020, and till the end of January, only about 37 million Americans had received one shot of the vaccine. Now, the arrival of Delta in April of 2021 was countered by a widespread inoculation drive. About 180 million doses were issued. And at the height of Delta, beginning in August 2021, about 350 million vaccines had been administered. Now, this is reflected in the amount of people calling in sick, and with the numbers rising up to only 4.7 million in September, despite this much more aggressive variant. Now, the Omicron variant has pushed out Delta over the course of 1 month, making up 97% of all the new cases in January 19th, as of January 19th of this year, 2022. So, point being, while Omicron is allegedly less lethal, its comparatively mild symptoms are still forcing a growing number of people to stay home. When you apply this to the essential members of the workforce, like medical professionals and workers employed in logistics, retail, manufacturing, this development may cause a growing number of disruptions in the economy into the continuing future. And it's further exacerbated by, guess what? Supply chain disruptions, resource shortages, and then the resignations that were already in place. So here we are, even with a massive vaccination campaign, we have record workforce shortages due to the current variants. Now, I'm going to do a little audience participation here. I have a question for you. Are you, or if you're working for someone else as your employer, finding it difficult to fill positions? Something I'm curious about with the people on the call. In other words, is this worker shortage resonating with you? Yes. Yeah, you can type in yes if it is. You can type in no, this hasn't been affecting us. If you have any discussion or comments about it, I'd be interested to see. Are you in a position where you are personally seeing that it's difficult to fill positions? So here's the upshot. And this is a comment from Employee Benefit News that came in just yesterday, April 4th. And it talks about the impact of the worker shortage and the way that the impact is going to have its effect on employers. And what Employee Benefit News said is that the Great Resignation indicates a new normal in hiring standards. Accomplished and empowered applicants call most of the shots, and employers have to adapt to meet their expectations. Companies that resist change in the recruiting process are not going to see the same success as those that embrace it. So what this really means is that workers with desirable skill sets are in a seller's market. They can name their work conditions, they can name their price. So if you're looking at a knowledge management crisis, this one has a whole new element to it, as people with expertise can easily jump ship. They can take their critical knowledge and skill sets with them. So how does a company deal with knowledge management in such a volatile environment? Well, let's talk about some solutions. First of all, you need to find your important internal people today, and you need to make them happy because you want to keep them around. You want to make sure you treat them like subject matter experts. And you also want to make sure that you know what they know, just in case they do leave. Make sure you find out what your critical people are doing. And the next thing you want to do is look for gaps in your organization. Who's missing now? How long can you continue to operate without them? Some companies can minimize the potential negative impacts through succession planning. Succession planning can help prepare your workforce for these inevitable departures, these retirements, and even promotions. They're going to leave empty spaces. It also provides advancement opportunities for current employees, as well as ensuring business continuity. One company, there's a company called Expert HR. They issued a checklist on succession planning to solve this problem, and it builds in the need to retain your expert knowledge to give your organization the stability that it needs to thrive in this year, 2022 and beyond. So it is very recently issued this checklist and really looking at exactly the kind of problems we're talking about. So their checklist was built on senior management's commitment to invest in a planning and development process and to ensure that key staff have ample advancement and promotional opportunities. Again, it's about retention. This was built on a retention model. And it included some popular working with SME's themes, like identifying key people, identifying the information that must be retained, bringing in different levels of expertise, and detailing all these instructions and the workflows within your training so that you've preserved what you need when you're hiring new people, you're ready to have them hit the ground running. So the bottom line of all this is that people are leaving. So companies need to come up with plans to retain their experts. They need to capture their knowledge in a logical way so it can be passed on to new people. And they need to make it a priority in 2022 for business survival. Essentially, this shortage of people and now resources has escalated this entire issue of retaining your experts. So when you have a deluge of departures and a lot of turnover of your desirable people who are skilled and knowledgeable, you don't have the luxury of casually retaining everything or training on everything that people need to know. You need to be able to discern between the expertise that's nice to know versus the information and the people you need to keep your business running. So we're going to go through a few basic principles of retaining expert knowledge in this environment. So where are the gaps in the organization? And do those gaps matter? It's important. You need to ask who is essential. The test of the pandemic and forcibly losing people probably brought some of these really important experts to the forefront of your organization, or just these important people who help you operate on a daily basis. So ask yourself, what do you make? Who do you need to make it? Who do you serve? And who has those relationships with your customers? Where did you lose business when you sent people home? Was there a business unit that couldn't function because specific individuals weren't available? There you can identify somebody. So in the absence of essential materials to continue to do what you do, does the engineering function become more important? What does that mean? Well, you may have to redesign your products to continue to operate. Wherever things could not continue without the input of certain individuals, those are the experts you need to be talking to. And those are the people you need to be working with before they leave the company for good. And there's another aspect of this completely, which is that the world is changing its priorities. And because the world is shifting its focus, that impacts what's important. So for those experts who were essential to your business in 2018 before all of this happened, well, they may no longer be relevant. Alignment with the direction of executives and where the ownership is taking the company or the product line can impact your knowledge management and training efforts. In other words, the company may not be doing what you were doing before, or it might be doing it in a different way. It means your knowledge management efforts can't be short-sighted, or worse yet, hindsighted, where they are focused on what you used to do or how you used to do it, because the pandemic and the supply chain disruptions have shifted priorities and made some changes possible because certain types of manufacturing are slowed or they're stopped. So for example, the shift from the internal combustion engine, the good old gas engine, to electric cars is actually much easier now because so much of the world slowed down or it just simply stopped producing. So those people who were your experts in 2018 might be irrelevant in 2022 as you start things up again. And this can be true in any industry. For example, let's look at finance. If money management shifts from a fiat currency, the paper money that we use in any government issued by the government, if that changes to digital currency, you're going to go from a demand-driven economy, we make what people want, to a command economy, people get what we make. And that means instead of having control over spending your own money or resources, a digital dollar could give the government control over your assets and could direct consumption. So what does that mean? Well, for money managers who were finance experts in the past, this new way of thinking about money and spending and markets is going to change everything. And finally, this shortage of raw materials, which we're seeing, and energy is going to change business in ways that we don't even completely understand yet. So where these affect your business, for example, a wheat shortage or a price increase, does that affect the viability of a product line if you own a bakery plant? In fact, right after I wrote this, I saw that a major bakery in the UK is shutting down. And they're the main provider of bread for a huge portion of the country. So yeah, these things are changing, and they're going to be changing the way we all do business. So you want to check your training programs for relevance, because a radical shift in what we produce and how we produce it means that your people are doing different things. You need to update training programs to reflect new ideas. You need to recognize what we call your nexperts. Who are these guys? These are the recently graduated employees that are bringing new ways of doing things, new concepts, and new materials to the business. Yesterday's business assumptions will sink you. We are there. I've been talking about this for a couple of years, but we are there. So these radical shifts that we're talking about affect your knowledge management plans. In fact, depending on your industry, you may want to focus on finding and working with your nexperts, your young experts who are trained in the ways that things are going to be done. And they may be focused on things like robotics, artificial intelligence, and even computer brain interfaces, which really shift the whole knowledge management paradigm. Now, having said that about the importance of young experts in today's changing environment, remember that your legacy experts in your organization know things that you will need to know to keep some things moving, or even just to make a smooth transition. So even though your young experts have a place of prominence in your organization, don't ignore your seasoned experts. The saying, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, if anyone's ever heard that old expression, it means when you're eliminating old training and you're deleting expired documents, make sure you retain what's important, because there is internal organizational knowledge that is important, and it's important to the ongoing functioning of your organization. And you have to know the difference between what's expired and what's irrelevant. And you need to respect that value that the old but relevant information has for going forward. When something new comes in, the old ways, well, we refer to them as dinosaurs, right? In this case, don't disregard the seasoned experts and the organizational knowledge that is essential to your business. It takes wisdom to know the difference. So involve your seasoned experts and your nexperts together to decide what to keep and what to discard as you examine your internal knowledge management programs. How are we doing so far? Okay. So that brings us to taking stock of where you're at today. So this leads us to some guidelines for operating in this shifting world, where what you make, how you make it, and even why you make it are all subject to change. So consider having a knowledge management team within business units that can review the training, review your documentation, and really take a good look at it during this global shift in priorities. So if you were to put together a knowledge management team to review the old and assess the new and come up with a new plan, here are some ideas for reviewing knowledge management programs. So for one of the first things you'll want to do is note all your discontinued products and business lines. And then make sure you eliminate the training programs that go with them. And also making sure you delete obsolete SOPs from circulation. I say from circulation, not delete them completely, but archive them so that you have a record of what you've done. I think that some companies automatically delete things after a certain amount of time. And internally, I know there are people who would still like to be able to at least have access to that for reference. So that's one thing to look at. Also, you want to emphasize your new products, your new business lines, and your new ways of doing business, your operations. Emphasize those things. Take note of new rules and regulations. They could be from the government. They could be from professional associations who have new standards. They could be local and regional laws that affect the way you do business. Make sure you're taking note of all those new rules and regulations and how they affect you. And then you want to update your operations manuals, your flow charts, organizational charts, floor plans, maps, anything that needs to be updated. In other words, it's a very comprehensive look at what you're doing. And then you need to acquire or create machine and product manuals for what you're doing now and what you plan to be doing in the future. Finally, you're going to create training on these new processes and these new product lines. Again, after you've been through this process of vetting what you currently have and how the business is changing. So training typically looks at jobs in front of you and the jobs sometimes that you're doing beside you. So this is the horizontal view of knowledge, as experts know what they know, and they know the related functions as they interact with one another. The horizontal view is the most important one when you're collecting knowledge and when you're passing it on. Now, the vertical view is one that looks up and down the chain of command. And when you're deciding what to preserve and whether to preserve it, this is the very important view, because you don't want to preserve what is no longer necessary, which is what we've really been talking about here. So when you're creating training and knowledge transfer programs, you need to be in alignment with the goals of the company. You need to know its future direction and the way the business products and services fit into the larger world. So you don't want to waste your money and time preserving knowledge you won't need, whether it's because the raw materials are no longer available or because the market has completely disappeared. It's possible, right? It certainly is possible. So these shortages of people, shortages of materials are real. Plans for these shortages are made in the context of the shift in focus. So as long as it's possible, when you're in a business that's operating in a new reality, especially a legacy business that is challenged with shifting its focus, you need to step back and consider a few things as you create a knowledge management program that can make the most of your legacy assets while making room for the new ones. So to create a knowledge management plan, you want to look at your people. Again, this great resignation. What is their availability? And then when you look at who's available, what are their attitudes? Do they fit with the corporate culture or with the new corporate culture, the way things might be changing within your organization, for example? And then, of course, you must look at aptitude. Are they really capable of doing the jobs that you need them to do? Again, part of really assessing where you're at. And then assess your geography. You need to be looking at your government. This is becoming more and more important. What is allowed? What can you and can't you do? Really need to know these things. And also this other thing is becoming very important as we're looking at global supply chain breakdown. You want to look at your access and your proximity to your resources, because we're going to be moving some supply chains closer to home, making what we can make where we have access to it. And again, this leads us into the discussion of resource and material supplies. You might need substitutions to keep something operating, say a machine. You might need substitutions for a formula that you're using to create a product or service. You could, and that would require formula changes. Again, looking at this from a knowledge management perspective, how did we do it? How are we doing it going forward? If substitutions aren't possible, if formula changes aren't possible, maybe some things need to be eliminated. Maybe you're not sure they need to be eliminated yet. If you're not sure, you want to wait before you eliminate them to see how things shake out, because we really are in a time of extreme flux. So one of the items that I discuss in my book several times is the fear that experts have about sharing their knowledge. Why are they afraid to share their knowledge? They're often worried about being displaced, or they're afraid of being replaced. In fact, I'm working with a group right now where this problem came up regarding the reluctance of some long-term employees to share what they know. Today, this is a different challenge because we aren't going back. What someone did yesterday or what they did 20 years ago might be outdated today. That this pace of knowledge acquisition changes what we're doing all the time, because knowledge doubles every 48 hours, according to some estimates. And that has to do with the amount of data collected every day and its effect on what we know. So after the pandemic, and now with the war, changing international business and trade and money, we don't know how that's going to go. But I think we can expect that the change that we saw coming for well over a decade, it is here. And it doesn't mean that there isn't a place for our experienced experts. There most certainly is. But we have to remember our baby and bathwater analogy. Don't throw out or disregard the old ways of doing things, because seasoned knowledge is irreplaceable. You also need to be prepared to live in a world where those young experts, they know now that things are very different. And what they know now is very different from what we knew 20 years ago. So what is possible is different. What is possible is expanded. Knowledge management is a very different animal when the world undergoes a radical shift. That shift is here. So look at your internal training and knowledge management systems to make sure that they reflect your current reality. Curate your materials, update your content continuously, and be able to adapt your knowledge management program to your company's future needs. And that concludes this presentation.
Peggy, we thank you so much for presenting with us today.
Thank you, Susan.